The porch swing whispered secrets to the gathering dusk. I hadn't sat there since the note. The swing's chains sang a sad song, not like the joyful noise they once made. Now the sound was all rust and regret. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and something else. Something metallic, like old blood on sun-baked pavement. Mom always said I worried too much. "Don't go looking for trouble, Danny," she'd warn, her brow furrowed. "Sometimes, trouble finds you." She was right about that much at least. This wasn't worry. This was a cold certainty, settling deep in my bones. It had been a long time, longer than I cared to admit. The bad dreams had never gone away. Not entirely. They just learned to be quiet, to lurk in the corners of my mind, waiting for an invitation. Now, they were throwing a party, a goddamn rave in my skull. The game started so innocently. Tag, we called it. Not hide and seek. Too cliché, even for us. But the woods, they had their own rules. I could feel the phantom itch on my skin, the sense of unseen eyes glued to my back. Even with the sun bleeding orange across the horizon, the shadows seemed to deepen, to reach out like skeletal fingers. I told myself it was just my nerves, just the weight of the past pressing down. But the lies tasted like ash in my mouth. The swing groaned, a drawn-out sigh that mirrored my own. Then I saw it, etched into the weathered wood of the porch railing. Half hidden by peeling paint was a symbol, a jagged, uneven star, like a child had drawn it with a blunt crayon. It wasn't one of those symbols, not like on the oak. It was something else, something newer. And beneath it, a single word, scrawled in what looked like dried blood. Run. A chill colder than any winter wind snaked down my spine. It was starting, but not where I expected. The game had changed. The rules had changed. And I had a feeling, a bone-deep conviction, that this time, there would be no safe place to hide. The back door slammed open and a voice called out, "Danny, you out here?" It was Sarah, but the way she said my name, it wasn't right. It was off-key, like a warped record. And behind her, standing just inside the doorway, I saw a flicker of movement. A shadow. A child-sized shadow. With glowing eyes. The words Sarah had spoken still echoed. A phantom vibration against my teeth. It wasn't her Sarah voice. It was a mimicry, perfect yet hollow, like a ventriloquist's dummy trying to tell a joke. She stood framed in the doorway, the porch light casting long, distorted shadows that danced around her like mischievous imps. The air crackled, thick with ozone and the metallic tang of fear. "Danny," she repeated, taking a step forward. Each footfall on the worn floorboard sounded like a death knell. The shadow behind her deepened, resolving into a figure. Small, too small. The red gleam of its eyes was unmistakable. Not a reflection. Something internal. I wanted to scream, to bolt, to do anything but stand there paralyzed. A rabbit caught in the headlights of a demon truck. But my feet were rooted to the spot, held captive by a primal terror that transcended logic. This wasn't just about the woods, the chanting, the grotesque parody of hide and seek. This was about Sarah. My Sarah, the woman who had seen me at my worst. The woman who had patiently pieced me back together after the woods had shattered me. "Sarah, honey, that isn't you," I managed, my voice a ragged whisper. A useless plea, I knew, but I had to try. She tilted her head, the movement unsettlingly bird-like. A strand of hair fell across her face, obscuring one of those damned glowing eyes. "But it is Danny," she said, her voice still off-key, like a badly tuned piano. "I'm evolving." The small figure behind her giggled, a sound that scraped against my sanity like fingernails on a chalkboard. It stepped into the light, revealing itself as a child, no older than 7 or 8. It wore a tattered, dirt-stained t-shirt and had a disturbing grin plastered across its face, revealing teeth that were far too sharp, too many. "She's right, Danny," the child lisped, its voice a horrifying blend of innocence and malice. "And soon, so will you." The porch swing creaked again, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to mock my helplessness. The honeysuckle, once so sweet, now smelled cloying, suffocating. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that I was out of time, out of options. The woods had finally caught up to me, and it was claiming everything I held dear. My past, my present, my future, all forfeit. I thought of running, fleeing into the night, leaving Sarah behind. Selfish, cowardly. But the instinct was overwhelming. But then I looked into her eyes, that flicker of the real Sarah struggling beneath the surface of the demonic possession, and I knew I couldn't. I wouldn't. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier this time, fueled by a desperate resolve. "What do you want from us?" The child skipped forward, its bare feet making no sound on the porch. It stopped a few feet away from me, its glowing eyes boring into mine. "We want to play, Danny," it said, its smile widening. "We want to play forever." And then, Sarah moved. Not with the hesitant, puppet-like movements of a possessed victim, but with a sudden, terrifying purpose. She raised her hand, pointing a finger at me, and whispered a single word. A word that made my blood run cold. A word that sealed my fate. "Seek-tie." The poodle's disappearance had been a whisper of unease, a fleeting shadow in the corner of your eye. Buster's demise, a jarring chord of dissonance. But the children were a goddamn symphony of wrong. Everyone yammered about coyotes. Simple explanations for simple minds. Like slapping a band-aid on a severed limb. I'd tried to reason, to convey the dread that coiled like a viper in my gut. But their eyes glazed over, their smiles turning patronizing. "Danny, you're seeing things." I was seeing things, all right. Things that would curdle milk and bleach the color from your hair. The town had become a pressure cooker of unspoken terror. You could taste it, metallic and acrid, like sucking on a rusty nail. Then the youngsters started changing. Little Timmy, a cherubic kid who'd once offered me a dandelion, had sunk his teeth into Mrs. Gillingham's prize-winning roses. And then, into Mrs. Gillingham herself. Susie, quiet Susie, had unleashed a torrent of obscenities that would make a sailor blush. And their eyes, Christ, their eyes, like chips of obsidian catching the light, reflecting something ancient and hungry. I'd witnessed them in the woods, a patch of emerald gloom where sunlight feared to tread. Their laughter, once a joyful sound, now echoed with a chilling discordance. A coven holding some obscene revelry. They were playing hide and seek, but this wasn't the innocent game of childhood summers. This was something else. A perversion, a dark reflection in a carnival mirror. They moved with a fluid grace that defied their age, their voices raised in a chant, a guttural litany that vibrated in my teeth. I couldn't decipher the words, but I felt their meaning. Evil, pure, unadulterated evil, like a black tar seeping into the soil. One of them, a girl with pigtails and eyes like a shark, stopped, turned, and locked onto me. It was a gaze that could strip paint, that could freeze hell over. A hatred burned behind those black pupils, a bonfire of malice. Then she smiled. Not a sweet, innocent curve of the lips. No. This was a predatory baring of teeth, rows of needle-sharp points, glinting in the dim light. A wolf in kid's clothing. They knew I was there. They wanted me to be there. To witness their depravity. To drown in my own fear. And God Almighty, I was afraid. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My legs felt like lead. But I ran. I ran like a man possessed, branches clawing at my face, roots tripping me, the laughter of those unholy children chasing me through the trees. I didn't stop until I slammed the door of my house, bolted it, dead-bolted it, barricaded it with every piece of furniture I could shove against it. But it was a futile gesture, a child's attempt to hold back the tide with a sandcastle. They were already inside, under my skin, in the marrow of my bones, waiting. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the real game was about to begin. The hunt had turned personal, and I was the prey. The no-sleep diet was taking its toll. The mirror showed a stranger, hollow-eyed, skin stretched taut over bone, a roadmap of worry etched onto my forehead. Each blink brought a fresh replay of those faces, the unnatural gleam in their eyes like embers in a bottomless pit. The library became my refuge, a mausoleum of forgotten knowledge. Ancient tomes, brittle and crumbling, whispered tales of things best left undisturbed. Demons, rituals, pacts made in blood under a gibbous moon. Each word felt like a shard of glass lodging in my throat. It was all folklore, wasn't it? Just stories to scare children. Except the children were doing the scaring now. The woods beckoned, a siren's call I couldn't ignore. The place where I'd seen them, a glade shrouded in an unnatural gloom, felt like the epicenter of this creeping dread. Hours I wandered, each step crunching on fallen leaves, the silence broken only by the frantic hammering of my heart. Then I found it, the clearing, a festering wound in the heart of the forest. The air was thick, cloying, like the smell of a butcher's shop after a week-long heat wave. A circle of stones, crudely arranged, pulsed with a dark energy. Not a comforting warmth, but a cold, predatory hum that resonated deep within my skull. More symbols, gouged into the stones with what looked like animal claws. The same symbols I'd seen on the tree. A pattern was emerging, a language of madness. And then, lying amidst the stones, a crude effigy. A doll, fashioned from twigs and rags, its limbs askew, its face a grotesque mockery of humanity. It was stained crimson, the blood still tacky to the touch. I reached for it, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't resist. The moment my fingers brushed its surface, a jolt, a surge of raw, malevolent power slammed into me. It felt like 1,000 volts of pure evil coursing through my veins, burning away everything good and decent. I recoiled, flinging the doll away as if it were a venomous snake. It landed with a soft thud, the silence that followed heavier than any tombstone. This wasn't a game. This was something ancient, something hungry, something that defied comprehension. I had to stop it. But how do you fight a darkness you can't even see? The sheriff's office was a joke. Dismissive glances, smirks hidden behind hands. Sounds like you've been watching too many horror flicks, Mr. Anderson. Paperwork shuffled, promises of increased patrols that would never materialize. They saw a crackpot, a man haunted by shadows. They didn't see the darkness spreading, the rot taking hold. Time was running out. I felt it in the air, in the way the shadows seemed to lengthen and twist, in the unsettling stillness of the animals. The children were growing stronger, their influence seeping into the very fabric of the town. And then I started seeing them, everywhere. Lingering near the grocery store's magazine rack, standing in the gas station's parking lot as I refilled my tank, even at the edge of my backyard as I drank my morning coffee. Just standing there, their glowing eyes fixed on me, their smiles a grotesque parody of innocence, daring me to act, taunting me with their silent, malevolent glee. What could I do? I was just one man, armed with nothing but fear and a growing sense of desperation, against an army of darkness wearing the faces of children. It was at the park that I felt the most dread. The swings creaked, the wind picked up, whispering voices in my ear. A ball rolled towards me, seemingly out of nowhere. The air grew colder, my breath visible in the afternoon light. The Founders Day picnic, a Norman Rockwell painting gone horribly wrong. I'd argued against it, pleaded with Sarah to just stay home, watch a movie, anything but this. This cheerful charade. Fresh air, Danny, she'd chirped, oblivious to the pall of dread hanging over me like a funeral shroud. Sunshine. Remember sunshine? I should have chained myself to the radiator. Should have feigned a sudden, explosive case of the Ebola virus. Anything. The moment we crossed the makeshift banner strung between two oak trees. Welcome to Founders Day! The hairs on the back of my neck stood to attention like soldiers. They were here. Of course they were. Swarming the bouncy castle, lining up for hot dogs. Their faces smeared with ketchup and something else. Something darker. Something that didn't wash off with soap and water. Their eyes. You couldn't miss the eyes. A dull internal luminescence, like dying fireflies trapped in their skulls. Watching. Always watching. Waiting for the signal, the opportune moment to pounce. I tried to play it cool, to force a smile, to pretend that the world hadn't tilted on its axis, and plunged headfirst into a Lovecraftian nightmare. But the air itself was thick with it, with the suppressed screams of the damned, with the palpable threat of unspeakable violence lurking beneath the veneer of small-town Americana. Then, the messenger arrived. Timmy Johnson. Little Timmy. The kid who used to bring me cookies shaped like dinosaurs. Now, his face was pale, his eyes burning, his smile. Oh God, that smile. He clutched a balloon, a garish red sphere bobbing mockingly in the breeze, like a harbinger of doom at a birthday party. "Want to play a game, Danny?" he rasped, his voice a gravelly baritone that didn't belong to a child. It was the voice of something ancient, something wicked, something that had crawled out of a forgotten grave. I tried to backpedal to put some distance between myself and the grinning little demon, but he blocked my path with unnerving speed. "Just hide and seek," he said, his smile widening, revealing rows of teeth that were too sharp, too plentiful. He used to be so good at it. Sarah. Doe. Where the hell was Sarah? I scanned the crowd, a desperate prayer forming on my lips, but she was nowhere to be seen. Swallowed by the cheerful throng, lost in the swirling vortex of the damned. I was alone, cornered, surrounded by an army of glowing-eyed horrors, their smiles promising unspeakable torments. "No," I croaked, my voice a mere whisper. "I don't want to play." Timmy's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory gaze that could freeze molten steel. "You have to play, Danny," he said, his voice laced with a chilling finality. "It's the rules." And then, they began to close in. A silent, relentless tide of children, their laughter echoing through the park, a discordant symphony of impending doom. The words. They were chanting the words again, the same guttural phrases I'd heard in the woods, the unholy litany that ripped at the fabric of reality. The air grew colder, a bone-chilling frost that settled on my skin. The sky turned a bruised purple, the sun a distant memory. A wave of power surged through me, a force both terrifying and strangely familiar, threatening to shatter my sanity, to rip me apart from the inside out. I tried to run, to break free from the encroaching circle of hellspawn, but it was too late. They were on me, their hands reaching, grasping, their eyes burning into my soul. I screamed, a primal, guttural scream that tore from my throat. A scream that should have shattered windows and stopped hearts. But no one heard me. No one could help me. I was drowning in a sea of demonic children, dragged down into the depths of their twisted game. They hauled me towards the center of the park, towards the ancient oak tree, its bark scarred with those unholy symbols, the gateway to something. They forced me to my knees, the rough grass digging into my skin, the scent of damp earth and decay filling my nostrils. And then, they began to play. It wasn't hide and seek. Not anymore. This was something far worse. Something that would leave scars that would never heal. This was a game for keeps. "She's one of us now, Danny," Timmy had chirped. The words, delivered with that saccharine, corrupted innocence, were a rusty knife twisting in the pit of my stomach. I stared at Sarah, at the subtle but undeniable shift in her eyes. The glow wasn't a trick of the light. It was something blooming from within, like a malignant flower. My Sarah, the woman who made me laugh until my sides ached, who patiently unraveled the knots in my soul, was slipping away, replaced by a grotesque imitation. "Let her go," I'd managed, the plea sounding pathetic even to my own ears. A futile gesture against a force I barely understood. Timmy's smile widened, a ghastly parody of childhood glee. "She's going to play with us, forever." The gazebo felt like a cage, the cheerful bunting now a macabre decoration. The air was thick with the sickly sweet scent of cotton candy, and the metallic tang of impending doom. Panic clawed at my throat, a desperate choking feeling. This was it. This was the culmination of the nightmares, the chanting, the creeping dread that had haunted me since childhood. It had all led to this moment, this horrifying tableau. I lurched forward, intending to grab Sarah, to to somehow yank her back from the precipice of whatever abyss these things were dragging her into. But she flinched away from my touch, her eyes widening with a chilling revulsion. "Don't touch me," she hissed, her voice distorted. "Alien. You're dirty." The words were a slap in the face, a brutal rejection that echoed the unspoken fears I'd harbored for years, that I was somehow tainted, that my darkness would inevitably infect those I loved. "Sarah," I choked out, reaching for her again. "Please, you're not yourself." She recoiled further, pressing herself against Timmy as if seeking protection. "I'm better now, Danny," she sneered, her lips twisting into a cruel smile. "I'm free." The other children began to advance, their laughter a cacophony of madness that scraped against my eardrums. Their eyes, glowing like embers in the twilight, were fixed on me with a predatory hunger. I was trapped, surrounded, outmatched. The picnic, once a symbol of community and celebration, had become a hunting ground. Despair threatened to engulf me, a crushing weight that threatened to drag me under. I had failed her. I had failed to protect her, just like I'd failed all those years ago, in the woods. The familiar guilt gnawed at me, a relentless, unforgiving beast. But then, a flicker, a brief, almost imperceptible twitch in Sarah's eyes. A fleeting glimpse of the woman I knew, trapped beneath the surface of this demonic possession. A silent plea for help. "Run," she mouthed, the word barely audible above the children's laughter. "Get out. Save yourself." The light vanished as quickly as it had appeared, snuffed out by the encroaching darkness. Her eyes glazed over, her expression hardening into a mask of cold indifference. "It's too late, Danny," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "There's nowhere left to run." There's nowhere left to run. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. She was still in there, a prisoner in her own body, fighting against a force she couldn't comprehend. And if there was even the slightest chance of saving her, I couldn't give up. I wouldn't. My gaze fell on a splintered plank of wood lying near the gazebo's ruined foundation. A pathetic weapon, but it was all I had. I snatched it up, the rough wood digging into my palm, a small, insignificant act of defiance against the overwhelming darkness. "Stay back," I snarled, my voice trembling but firm. "I'm not afraid of you." The children's laughter intensified, a wave of mockery that washed over me. They didn't believe me. They could smell my fear, taste my desperation. But I had to try. I had to believe it myself. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus, to channel the rage and grief and terror into a single burning point. I was just one man, armed with a broken piece of wood, facing an army of demonic children. But I had something they didn't: love, and a desperate, unwavering hope that somehow, impossibly, I could save the woman I loved from the clutches of evil. With a roar that tore from the depths of my soul, I charged. The splintered wood connected with Timmy's temple, not quite as satisfying as I'd hoped. More of a dull thunk than a skull-splitting crack. He stumbled, yes, but his eyes remained locked on me, the malevolent light within them undimmed. I grabbed Sarah's hand, her skin cold and clammy, like touching a corpse. "Move it," I barked, the sound swallowed by the jeering chorus of the other kids. She didn't budge. It feels good," she whispered, her voice a horrifying blend of Sarah and something else. Something seductive and wrong. It was like she was fighting herself, caught in a tug of war between worlds. For a heart-stopping second, I thought I might actually reach her, pull her back from the brink. Her grip tightened on my hand, a spark of recognition flickering in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, I could still salvage this. Then, the light in her eyes flared brighter, hotter, and she ripped her hand from mine as if burned. "Liar," she hissed, her voice a venomous rasp. "You can't save me. I belong to them now." Hope, that treacherous bitch, evaporated, leaving behind a bitter residue of despair. The other children surged forward, a tide of tiny terrors. I shoved Sarah behind me, raising the makeshift weapon again. It wouldn't do much, I knew. Probably just pissed them off. But it was better than nothing. Better than cowering and waiting to die. Get away from her, I yelled, trying to sound braver than I felt. They didn't even pause. Timmy recovered from his head whack, grinned, revealing those two sharp teeth. You can't protect her, Danny, he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. She's ours now. And soon you will be too. The air crackled with an unnatural energy. I could feel it prickling my skin, raising the hairs on my arms. The gazebo seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the shadows deepening. It was like being trapped inside a malevolent snow globe. I swung the wood again, connecting with another child's arm. A satisfying snap, but the kid barely flinched. They were too far gone, too deeply entrenched in whatever dark magic had consumed them. This wasn't a fight I could win. It was a slaughter. Then, I heard it. A sound so faint, so unexpected, that for a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. A dog, barking. Not the frantic, panicked yelping of a frightened animal, but a deep, resonant bark, full of anger and something else. Something primal and protective. The children paused, their glowing eyes momentarily flickering. Confusion? Fear? Whatever it was enough. A split second of hesitation in the face of relentless evil. The barking grew louder, closer, and then a figure burst through the trees, a blur of fur and teeth and fury. Not just any dog. It was Buster, Old Man Hemlock's mutt, the one that had turned up dead in the town square. Except, he wasn't dead. Not anymore. His eyes glowed with the same malevolent light as the children, but there was something different about him. Something fierce, something loyal. He charged into the gazebo, a snarling whirlwind of canine rage, scattering the children like bowling pins. They screamed, not with pain, but with a high-pitched, ear-splitting shriek that made my teeth ache. They scrambled back, retreating from the unexpected attack. Buster turned to me, his glowing eyes boring into mine. For a moment, I thought he was going to attack me too. But then, he nudged Sarah with his nose, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Get out of here, I said to Sarah, my voice hoarse. Go with him, now. She hesitated, her eyes still glazed over. But then, something flickered in her gaze, a spark of understanding. She nodded, slowly, and took a tentative step towards Buster. He turned and bounded out of the gazebo, disappearing back into the trees. Sarah followed, her movements still stiff and unnatural. But hope? Maybe. I watched them go, my heart pounding in my chest. A moment of reprieve, bought with a dead dog's resurrection and a whole lot of questions I didn't want to think about right now. But then, the children turned back to me, their eyes burning brighter than ever. And Timmy smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that promised pain beyond imagining. You think you've won, Danny, he said, his voice a chilling whisper. You haven't seen anything yet. The gazebo doors slammed shut, seemingly of their own accord. The shadows deepened, and the air grew heavy with the stench of sulfur. And then, the chanting began again. Louder this time, more intense, more personal. I was trapped, alone, and the game was far from over. It had only just begun. I raised the splintered wood, ready for whatever fresh hell was about to be unleashed. But the wood was starting to crumble in my hands. The splintered timber stung, a wasp sting of pain blooming on my cheekbone. Enough, though. Enough to break the spell, if only for a heartbeat. I yanked Sarah toward me, her hand like a frozen sparrow in mine. Run! I bellowed, my voice cracking like cheap ice. Just run. She balked, digging in her heels. Danny, she moaned, her voice a frayed whisper. I'm part of them now. No time for arguments, no time for tears. The little monsters were closing, their eyes burning with a malevolent glee that promised pain beyond the reach of any doctor's morphine. I hooked an arm around Sarah's waist, ignoring her feeble struggles, and dragged her toward the gazebo's edge. We jumped, landing hard on the parched ground. My ankle twisted, sending a jolt of agony up my leg. But I kept moving, kept pulling Sarah along. We ran like hellions pursued, away from the gazebo, away from the giggling horde, away from the nightmare that had swallowed our town whole. But they were faster, unnaturally so. Their tiny legs churned, their eyes glowing like hot coals in the gathering dusk. Gaining, always gaining. I risked a glance back. Close, too damn close. Their smiles, those grotesque parodies of childish innocence, were knives aimed at my soul. And then I saw it. The old well, swallowed by weeds and neglect. A gaping maw in the earth. Abandoned years ago, a relic of a kinder, gentler time. It was a long shot, a prayer whispered into the void, but it was all we had. Hide, I rasped, hauling Sarah toward the well, ignoring her bewildered protests. We have to hide. We reached the crumbling stone lip, and I peered into the darkness. Deep, dull, black as a preacher's heart. It smelled of damp earth and something else, something ancient and fetid, like the breath of a forgotten god. Still, it beat the alternative. I lowered Sarah into the well, her body trembling in my grasp. Then, heart hammering against my ribs, I followed her down, scrambling for purchase on the moss-slick stones. We huddled together in the claustrophobic darkness, the silence broken only by our ragged breathing and the distant echo of children's laughter. They were searching for us. We were rats in a trap, and they were the grinning, gleeful exterminators. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for a miracle, praying for anything to make it stop. Then, a voice. A small, chillingly sweet voice, right above us. "Peekaboo, Danny," it lisped. "We see you." The well began to shake, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the stone. They were pushing it, those little bastards, trying to collapse it, trying to bury us alive in the bowels of the earth. I wrapped my arms around Sarah, bracing myself for the inevitable cave-in, for the crushing weight of stone and dirt, for the final, suffocating darkness. But then, something happened. A light. Not the dull, malevolent glow of the children's eyes, but something pure, something incandescent. A blinding, holy light that filled the well, chasing away the shadows, silencing the laughter. The shaking stopped. The children's voices faded into a distant whisper. I looked up, shielding my eyes against the blinding radiance. Standing at the top of the well, silhouetted against the fading sky, was a figure. Tall, imposing, shrouded in light. I couldn't make out any details, couldn't discern a face or form. It was too bright, too other. But I knew, deep in my gut, that it was good, powerful, our only hope in this godforsaken nightmare. A silent promise etched in light. The light show concluded, leaving a ringing silence deeper than any grave. The well stood sentinel, a dark mouth in the fading green. I hauled Sarah out, her limbs heavy, unresponsive. The park, moments ago a battleground of childhood nightmares, was now utterly deserted. The swings hung still, the slides gleamed dully, untouched. It was over. They were gone. But the dread, that icy tendril, still clutched my heart. Sarah wasn't back. Her eyes, no longer radiating that infernal light, held no light at all. They were like polished stones, reflecting nothing. She didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe. I carried her to the car, her weight a terrible burden. The drive home was a silent, agonizing crawl. Each streetlight seemed to mock me, casting long, skeletal shadows on her face. I laid her in our bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, sat beside her, a vigil of fear and exhaustion. The night stretched on, an eternity of silence punctuated only by the ticking clock and the rustling leaves outside the window. I watched her, praying for a sign, a twitch, anything to indicate the Sarah I knew was still trapped inside. But there was nothing. Morning arrived, a pale imitation of hope. Sarah remained unchanged, a doll in our bed. The doctors came, poked and prodded, their faces grim. Catatonic, they pronounced. Trauma-induced. Prognosis, uncertain. Uncertain? That word echoed in my head, a hollow drumbeat of despair. They spoke of specialists, of therapies, of the possibility, the dreaded possibility, that she might never return. I refused to believe them. I knew Sarah was in there, locked away behind some impenetrable wall, and I would tear that wall down, brick by agonizing brick, if I had to. I talked to her, rambling about our life together, about the stupid jokes we shared, about the dreams we had. I read her favorite books, my voice cracking with emotion. I played the music that always made her smile, the old Motown tunes that got her dancing in the kitchen. Nothing. Weeks bled into months, a monotonous cycle of hope and despair. I started to lose faith, to entertain the horrifying thought that maybe, just maybe, the Sarah I loved was gone forever, replaced by something else. I'd catch myself staring at her, searching for any sign of her true self, only to be met with that blank, unseeing gaze. Then, one afternoon, as I sat beside her, holding her hand, she stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, and she whispered a word. A single syllable that sent a jolt of electricity through my body. "Danny?" Her voice was weak, rusty, like a hinge long unused. I leaped to my feet, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. "Sarah?" I stammered, my voice thick with emotion. "It's me. It's Danny." She turned her head, her eyes focusing on me with a dazed confusion. What happened?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "Where am I?" The relief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drown me. But beneath the joy, a cold knot of fear remained. I told her everything, carefully, choosing my words, trying to shield her from the full horror of what had transpired. The children, the ritual, the well, the figure in the light. She listened in silence, her face growing paler with each word, her eyes widening with a dawning horror. When I finished, she began to cry, soft, racking sobs that tore at my soul. "It's all my fault," she choked out, her voice filled with guilt. "I let them take me. I let them hurt you." I knelt beside her, taking her hand in mine, squeezing it tightly. "It's not your fault," I said, my voice trembling. "It's over now. We're safe." But even as I spoke the words, I knew they were a lie. The park was silent. The children were gone. But the darkness lingered. It clung to the air, a miasma of fear and uncertainty. It was in Sarah's eyes, in the haunted look that remained even after the tears had dried. We were back, but something had shifted. The world felt different, tainted, and the unsettling feeling that we were still being watched, that the game was far from over, wouldn't leave me. Safe? No, we were not safe. We were just waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the darkness to return. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it would. Years ambled by, each one a hesitant step away from the abyss. Sarah, bless her heart, pieced herself back together, like a shattered vase painstakingly glued. The cracks remained, hairline fractures in her soul, but she was whole enough. We fled that town, that festering wound on the map, for someplace quieter, someplace where the woods didn't seem to breathe with malice, a place where the shadows didn't whisper your name. We tried. God, we tried to rebuild, to paint over the horror with normalcy. Sarah went back to teaching. I sold houses, haunted by the feeling that every clapboard colonial hid a cellar full of secrets. Every manicured lawn masked a patch of unholy ground. The nightmares. They dulled, like an old knife blade, but they never vanished. They lurked, patient predators in the dark corners of my mind, waiting for a moment of weakness. A creak in the night, a child's laughter echoing too sweetly. Then, it happened. I saw him, at the park, of all places. A bright, sunny afternoon, mothers pushing strollers, dogs chasing frisbees. A Rockwellian scene designed to soothe the soul. Except, he didn't belong. He was alone, a small figure on the swings, his movements too deliberate, too precise for a child. He pumped his legs, sending the swing arcing higher and higher, his face obscured by a curtain of sunlight. He looked normal. That was the terrifying part. Just a kid, enjoying a swing, until he turned. His eyes, they weren't black pits, not anymore. Now, they glowed with a faint internal luminescence, like dying embers beneath a layer of ash. Barely perceptible, you might have missed it if you weren't looking, if you hadn't seen that same unholy light burning in the eyes of other children years ago. He smiled, a slow, deliberate unfolding of the lips that sent a shiver crawling up my spine. It wasn't the innocent grin of a child. It was something calculating, predatory. He raised a hand, a small, innocent hand, and waved. And then, he spoke. The words sliced through the years, through the fragile veneer of normalcy we had constructed. They echoed with a chilling familiarity, a promise of pain and terror. "Ready or not," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that didn't belong to a child. "Here I come." The world tilted. The sun seemed to dim. The laughter of the other children faded into a distant, mocking echo. The game wasn't over. It had never been over. It was just evolving. And this time, there was a new player. Little Billy, my son, swinging innocently, unaware of the darkness that had marked him, that had claimed him even before he was born. My blood turned to ice. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of burnt sugar and impending doom. The child on the swing continued to smile, his glowing eyes fixed on mine. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me, at something behind me. I turned, slowly, dread coiling in my gut. Sarah stood there, a vacant smile on her face, her eyes glowing with the same faint, unholy light as the child on the swing. "He's just like you, Danny," she whispered, her voice a chilling echo of the past. A perfect little seeker. The game had changed again, and this time, the prey was me.